It was huge. You know, when people think of a 63 split window Corvette, the most obvious thing they're looking at is literally the split window in the back. But really that design came from the original XP87. It was a really cool concept car that Bill Mitchell, Larry Shinoda, and Pete Brock, the Daytona Coupe guy, at a very young age put together. And really a lot of the lines, all of these lines here, the dummy vents in the front, the whole look of that car was really from the XP87, and what a good looking car it was. So how big a deal was a 63 compared to a 62? It was huge. It was night and day. You went from pretty flimsy chassis with drum brakes all around. Yes, they did have fuel-injected motors, and they had 4 speeds, and they had some pretty decent performance, but they really weren't that good of a working car. To this car here, which really almost became a race car. The 63 Z06 big tank car, that was a formidable car, and that was before the Grand Sports. It was a really quick car in its own right. And here's the difference between the chassis. They came with independent suspension, no more solid axles. By 65, they came with disc brakes, but in 63 and 4, you could get the big drum brake option on the Z06, and it was a pretty impressive stopping package with that. Handling wise, you had sway bars, you had a much stiffer chassis, you had a way better working car. The fuel injected, the 360 horse, that was sort of the top of the pile. It was a great working car. Then as far as some of the cool options that you could get, well, obviously the big tank, the Z06, the suspension package, the big brake package, but you could also get some creature comforts. You could get air conditioning, you could get power steering, power brakes, you could get, although very rare, the knockoff wheels with the 2 lug knockoffs. You could also get interior-wise, you could get the leather interior. You could really load up the cars, and you could make a pretty neat package, whether you wanted a cruiser like this one. Now, it's not the base car. This is a 300 horse car. You had a 250 base motor, or you could get a 340 horse motor, or the Fuelie with a 360 horse. Most of the cars were 4 speeds, although probably about 10% would have been automatics, but really rare. It's not uncommon though to see an automatic with air conditioning. That was a package that kind of went together quite often. As far as styling goes, nothing beats a 63 split window. You can make an argument for a 67 big block car, but that split window is just iconic. And how good was that chassis? Well, really, they used that same chassis, same suspension, same everything, other than in 65, they went to the 4-wheel disc brakes, until, would you believe, 1982. It wasn't until 1984, when the new C4 came out, that really the car changed. The C3 Corvette is almost on exactly the same chassis. So that's a long run with the same thing, and it was a really good working car. So really, like a lot of the muscle car era, it was all about the engine. This one here, it's not the base version. You could have a 250 horse. This is the 300 horse. It's got all the ignition heat shielding. This one has power steering. You could also get power brakes on it. You could also get air conditioning. So this is a good cruiser, and this is exactly what this car is. I mean, if you got a Z06 big tank car that's, a super original low mileage car, there's some big money. I mean, there was a 5,000 miler that sold at Gooding, I think, maybe a year or 2 ago. It was almost $1 million for that car. That's the cream of the crop. A lot of guys just want to say, hey, I want to go cruising. This car is perfect for that. It's just a car that really hasn't been played with much, really has never been a part, just a good, honest car, very original car, not perfect, but it gets you in the door. It gets you the look, the feel, it gets you a nice cruiser. You really don't need much more if you're just gonna go for an ice cream with the kid on Sunday afternoon. $150,000 buys you a very good example, an honest 63 split window sort of base level. So although this isn't a big horsepower car, I think Gary's gonna really enjoy taking this for a drive. He's gotta have his expectations in line. It's not gonna be a big powerhouse. It's still not gonna stop on a dime like a 4-wheel disc brake car, and it doesn't have the big brakes like the Z06 package, but it's a fun, cruising, touring type car that still gets all of the same looks as any 63 split window.
I'm excited to refresh my memory on how these things drive. I probably haven't driven one of these cars in 5 or 6 years, and I always say they're one of my all-time favorite cars to drive from the 60s. So I'm excited for this. Fires up instantly, that's great. All right, let's go. These cars, you gotta remember, they're leaps and bounds above the C1, above the solid axle sports car racing that was, you know, that era in the 50s, the C1 Corvette. You got an independent rear suspension car. The car turns beautifully. It's like twice as rigid. The chassis is super rigid. All because, I shouldn't say all because, but you got to keep in mind a big portion of that was because Duntov was a real race car driver. He won Le Mans twice for Porsche in class back in the day. He had these huge desires to build this Grand Sport program, go win Le Mans with Corvette, with Chevrolet. You know, he always had race cars at the forefront of his mind. He always had racing at the forefront of his mind, and we're that much better for it when the C2 comes out, when the 63 comes out, and we get to drive a proper American sports car. You know, and just so iconic in these Corvettes, the full red interior. The Ermi white exterior, great look, but this red interior is just classic. Let off the clutch, super predictable, super smooth. And again, everything I was expecting with this car. These cars drive so well. We'll get on it a little bit here. Up through the gears. Get our downshifts in, flip. Beautiful. M20 tranny is just perfect, as you'd expect in this car. These cars drive so well, and what I mean by these cars is these cars that haven't been fully torn apart and had a full restoration. Yes, you can get them working again, and you can probably get them even better than the factory, but there's something about a car that's never been apart, that drives super tight, just as it was intended from the factory. Oh, that was great. You know, there's something to be said for driving one of these cars that hasn't been fully restored, over-restored, just a good, honest, original car. Like one paint job on the thing. Man, it's completely renewed my appreciation for these cars. And then looking at them historically, just how iconic they were, how significant they were, and how they were so competitive for the time. They were a great car to buy in '63, absolutely. So now I guess we've got to ask ourselves the question, do you need a car like this? No. You know, 2024, no one needs a 1963 Corvette split window. But do you want a car like this? Yeah, if you're into American muscle cars, if you're into sports cars, oh yeah, you really want a car like this.